Okay, let's unpack this. We've been handed the A12 audit, specifically A12.86.2026.
That's the one.
And just looking at the conclusion of Site 86's minor anomalies unit operations over the last decade, I mean, the financials are genuinely nauseating.
Nauseating is the precise word for it. It's,
Right.
you're looking at documentation that's demanding a formal determination on how a relatively small, pretty localized containment unit,
Right.
how they managed to just obliterate $890 million in emergency foundation funds.
890 million.
And that's before you even get to the really big number.
The external losses.
The staggering $1.9 billion in estimated external losses. And those are losses attributed directly to operational failings tied to this one SCP.
So we're talking about a disaster worth nearly $3 billion. And it all started with what was supposed to be a low-priority investigation.
That's it.
So our mission here is clear. We need to trace the entire history of SCP-9100. It started as this local curiosity, a few senior citizens in Akron, Ohio. And we need to chart every single scientific misstep, every ethical compromise, and every bureaucratic failing that allowed it to turn into a global financial and operational catastrophe.
And that catastrophic spiral is the deep dive itself.
Mm-hmm.
It all began with an anomaly that was, on the face of it, just linked to rapid mental decline. A handful of people who thought they had somehow skipped decades of their lives.
Just gone.
Gone. So the question is, how did that purely localized psychological phenomenon cascade into a foundation-wide epidemic that left, 138 confirmed operational deaths and billions in global loss in its wake?
And the entire narrative, the whole investigation, it's just this clash of monumental personalities. You've got Site Director Harry Talbot.
The careerist.
Exactly, the ultimate bureaucrat. He sees resource allocation as just another rung on his personal climb up the executive ladder.
And then on the other side, you have Dr. Stuart Finley, abrasive but supremely competent, the head of research.
And his professional cynicism? It's like a shield, isn't it? A protective shield he absolutely refuses to drop.
A shield he's built up over decades. And then, caught right in the middle, you have junior researcher Dr. Marissa Vo.
She's sort of our proxy here, the one we see it all through.
She is. She's brilliant, ambitious. She desperately wants a specialized post in parapsychology, but she also has a conscience.
And that conscience starts to strain. You can see it in the documents. It's straining under the increasing pressure and the ethical erosion of the whole project.
It's the perfect toxic recipe, really.
Ambition, detachment, and an anomaly that, as we're about to see, thrives on exactly that kind of psychological distance.
It feeds on it.
So let's ground ourselves. It's 2014, Akron, Ohio. The discovery of SCP-9100 wasn't some planned investigation.
No, not at all.
It was a consequence of a major external tragedy, the mid-air collision of a Boeing 737 and an MD-80.
A massive scene. 141 fatalities, wreckage scattered for miles across residential areas. It was a huge disaster.
And of course, standard Foundation operating procedure means personnel are immediately embedded with first responders in any mass trauma event of that scale.
Right. They're on the ground, and they're looking for the anomalous vector that caused the crash. That's their primary mission.
We're not looking for secondary psychological fallout.
Not initially, no. But in the aftermath, they started noticing this deeply unsettling, recurring pattern of symptoms, specifically among the older citizens in the impact zone, the ones who had witnessed it all or, suffered a massive loss.
And what they identified was quickly dubbed the time skip.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, they cataloged 28 persons of interest, and all of them shared this incredible belief that they had instantaneously lost, on average, 35 years of their lives.
35 years. Just imagine that.
They believed they were young, and then, in a blink, just decades older.
And the traumatic event, the crash, the noise, the sheer shock of it, that seemed to be the switch, the violent release mechanism.
So one moment they're, expecting to go to work or have lunch.
And the next, they're sitting in a care facility, maybe decades older, confronted with a reality they just do not recognize.
The interview logs from the immediate aftermath they're really distressing to read.
They're brutal.
Just acute dissociation. They would look at their own hands, their reflection, their aged skin and teeth, and their comments were so deeply deprecating, they couldn't internalize this new identity. They genuinely believed they'd been robbed of a life.
And it wasn't just fleeting confusion, was it?
Not at all.
Because while they could eventually recall the missing decades, the memories were, what was the term? Low fidelity.
Yeah, like trying to remember a particularly dull dream. Fragmented, hazy.
And the immediate, terrifying consequence was this massive surge in severe mental health issues. Depression, anxiety, self-harm, and really terrifyingly, suicidal ideation.
Of course. They woke up to find themselves old, alone, and without any sense of purpose.
So the researchers did what they do best. They started a biographical deep dive into the lives of these 28 Poyas. Specifically, their lives after the presumed onset date, the last day they clearly remembered before the skip.
And the finding is, it's maybe the most critical piece of initial data. Their lives were extraordinarily, devastatingly unremarkable.
The very definition of average. I mean, it's almost statistically impossible. Despite decades of work, none of them had achieved any kind of distinction or significant authority or outstanding success in any field.
And the study showed they consistently scored within, 3 points of the 50th percentile on virtually every standardized cognitive or physical test administered to them during those missing decades.
Everything. Things as basic as the presidential fitness test or general cognitive aptitude tests. Always, always right in the middle. The perfect average.
So the initial hypothesis flips on its head.
Right.
They weren't suffering from an anomaly that the Akron disaster caused. The new hypothesis was that they were under the influence of an anomaly for most of their adult lives.
And the traumatic shock of the crash released them.
They had been effectively sleepwalking, living the most compliant, unchallenging, average life possible.
And this hypothesis gained immediate historical weight. And this is thanks to the archival work of Dr. Vo. She was brilliant.
Absolutely.
She linked these specific symptoms, the skip, the dissociation that followed, to past mass trauma events in Akron.
Like the building collapse in 1960.
And that catastrophic F4 tornado in 1965.
She proved this wasn't new. This was a recurring, low-grade endemic issue in that region.
And she found a chilling 1991 public health report. It noted that senior suicide rates in Akron were 10 times the national average.
10 times. So this wasn't minor at all. This is a deeply ingrained pattern of local societal failure that no one had ever connected.
And now enter the research dynamics. Dr. Stuart Finley is reassigned from Site 210 in Dover, UK. He's not happy about it.
No. He sees his posting to Site 86's Minor Anomalies Unit as a punishment, a demotion.
He called the site a knacker's yard, which, for anyone listening who doesn't know, is basically a slaughterhouse, a junk pile, a place where old, useless things are sent to die. His morale and his respect for the local command, particularly Director Talbot, were at absolute zero.
His contempt for Talbot was, well, it was legendary. The audit mentions voice memos where he's just frequently calling him a fucking bawbag.
A delightfully Scottish insult.
It is. It just implies an obnoxious, pompous blowhard. But Finley, for all his cynicism, had a gift for finding talent. And he was assigned Dr. Marissa Vo.
A brilliant junior researcher who was what they termed a rescue.
A rescue, right. That means she was recruited after a personal encounter with an anomaly, which often leaves them with a deeper, maybe more vulnerable, empathetic response to this kind of work.
And Finley recognized her scientific brilliance immediately. He called her fucking phenomenal, but he was also deeply concerned by her sensitivity.
The incident with Poya Samantha Morris.
Exactly. An 80-year-old woman just grappling with the trauma of her missing life. Vo broke down after the interview. And that's when Finley delivered the core lesson of his entire professional existence.
The old robot theory.
Yes. He advised her to take counseling, but he was emphatic. You get your shit straight, then you come back and do the work right, and never let it become personal.
He was advocating for complete professional detachment.
The very strategy he had used to survive 30 years in the most brutal sections of the Foundation. And, this philosophy, it becomes the central tragic flaw of the entire investigation.
Okay, so the team has its hypothesis. They need to find an SCP-9100A instance, someone who is still under the influence.
Right. In Vo's deep dive into the victims' recovered memories, the hazy ones, it yielded about 50 potential names.
And she quickly narrowed it down to Owen Parsons, PHA 30. And the reason it's fascinating, it's his improbable consistency.
Parsons was a textbook case of the anomalies effect. Vo discovered that he walked the same path from his house to a local bakery, leaving at exactly 9:14 a.m.
And arriving at precisely 9:59 a.m.
5 consecutive days a week. This level of precise, unvarying predictability, Vo argued, it wasn't just habit. It was evidence that the subject lacked any self-directed intent.
So wait, Finley committed an act of operational fraud just to capture an old man walking to a bakery.
He did.
That seems like an extraordinary level of operational risk for what was still classified as a minor anomaly case.
It was reckless. Absolutely. And it was highly indicative of Finley's contempt for bureaucracy. But they had a problem. They needed to detain Parsons without causing the traumatic shock that would awaken him.
Because that would eliminate their live research subject.
Exactly. So they used an emergency breach requisition, something normally reserved for imminent Keter-level containment failures. And yes, Finley brazenly misappropriated Talbot's authorization seal to sign the documents.
Unbelievable. And the lie they used to detain him, posing as National Geographic staff, offering him a trip to the International Space Station. It's brilliant, but it's also profoundly manipulative. It's cruel.
The audit notes the high risk of subsequent psychological fallout when he finds out the truth, but ultimately it just cites its operational success. It maximized compliance while minimizing stress.
And Parsons, the perfectly average man,
Elated, complied instantly, which in itself proved that the anomaly had suppressed his capacity for critical thought and judgment. Who believes that?
right. So, once contained, the initial findings confirmed their suspicions about his status. Parsons scored a 9 on the FA-12B individual initiative test. We should probably define that for people listening.
Yeah, the FA-12B is a standard psychological metric the Foundation uses. It measures spontaneity and self-initiated behavior, basically how much a subject acts independently versus just reacting to external stimulus.
And what's a normal score?
A normal baseline adult scores somewhere around 50 to 60.
So score of 9 is?
It's indicative of someone under heavy pharmacological compliance agents or suffering from profound cognitive impairment. Parsons was essentially inert.
Inert, but seemingly physically fine.
Correct. And on top of that, his Mince-Mean index was a very low 15. The Mince-Mean index is essentially a foundation metric for measuring the complexity and depth of conscious thought.
So it's like a measure of self-awareness.
In a way. Think of it as brain activity, but focus specifically on the areas associated with high-level personal narrative and self-awareness. A score of 15 suggests a consciousness that's barely above deep REM sleep. So what they had was an individual who was physically functional, but cognitively dormant and entirely predictable.
And this is where the first major scientific misstep happens. It leads them down the path of the ghost theory.
Right. They used the Eckhart-Mendel paraspectrography, the EMPSG.
And what does that equipment actually measure?
The EMPSG is designed to detect and measure extremely subtle, non-corporeal energy signatures associated with parapsychological phenomena.
So, ghosts.
Essentially, yes, spectral activity. And when they applied it to Parsons, they detected an extremely faint, non-repeating spectral signature that was overlaid on his natural brain activity. This signature was not Parsons.
So if it walks like a duck and quacks like a ghost.
Precisely. The initial, and I should say scientifically plausible conclusion was that SCP-9100 was a low-grade spectral entity.
A ghost.
A ghost. The theory was that these were boring, docile ghosts, possessing people so they could achieve a completely average, compliant existence. It was a scientifically novel idea, boring possession. But Finley was already bothered by it. The reproductive nature suggested by the Akron cluster. Ghosts don't usually need gestation periods.
But before he could properly investigate that reproductive nature, the bureaucracy hits.
Like a ton of bricks.
Talbot, furious about the breach requisition, the budget hemorrhage Finley had burned through half a year's minor anomalies budget in 1 month, demanded immediate closure. He wanted the case filed as closed, unexplained.
And that would have been the end of it. It would have just been another weird file in the archive. But Vaughn, she saw her parapsychology dream vanishing.
So she made her move.
She did. And this wasn't just ambition. It was true political cunning. She bypassed Finley entirely, went directly to Talbot, and she leveraged the idea of this novel spectral activity. She cited the potential for Foundation-wide applications in reducing civilian suffering or even implicitly behavioral control.
She used his own ambition against him.
It worked perfectly. The case was reopened, new funding materialized, and Vaux received a swift promotion. But there was a price.
And it was aimed directly at Finlow.
Immediately. He received a formal administrative reprimand for the improper use of the breach requisitions. So the deep dive continued, but the core relationship between Finley and the institutional structure had been fatally compromised by ambition and resentment.
So with the budget flowing again, the investigation, now including principal researcher Dr. Daniel Bakaluba, it just ramps up dramatically. By April 2015, they had confirmed 1,542 suspected cases in the Akron area.
A huge number.
And they hammered down the core transmission vectors.
They confirmed the anomaly had a gestation period of at least 5 years before a contaminated individual could actually transmit it. but the transmission criteria were fascinatingly precise.
Right. The recipient has to be making eye contact. That's one.
And crucially, brain imaging showed activation of the default mode network, the DMN.
The DMN. We need to define that because it's absolutely vital to how this anomaly functions.
It is. The default mode network is the network of brain regions that becomes active when you're awake, but not engaged in a specific task.
So when your mind is wandering.
Exactly. When you're daydreaming or just internally reflective, it's what kicks in when you stop paying attention to the external world and you start thinking about what's for dinner or your upcoming holiday.
So if the recipient is focused and actively processing the world, they're safe.
Safe.
But if they're passively daydreaming while looking into the eyes of a transmitter, they're vulnerable, inattention and eye contact.
Which, of course, gives Director Talbot his catastrophic idea.
Project Daydream.
And this is the moment the scientific investigation is completely hijacked by bureaucratic ambition. Talbot recognized the potential, an anomaly that turns highly unpredictable human subjects into compliant, low-initiative personnel.
Effectively removing human error from the equation.
A Level 2 classified initiative to use SCP-9100 as a human resource management tool, transforming D-Class and support staff into predictable, unwavering personnel.
He was gunning for a SCOTA award, wasn't he? The Foundation's highest honor for operational contribution. And he wanted it based on mass psychological subjugation.
Finley was, predictably, ballistic. His reaction was so severe, he actually leaked the initial Level 4 memo. He was demanding that the O4 Council understand the ethical and really the Keter-level risk profile of using a poorly understood psychological anomaly for human behavioral control.
And his efforts temporarily stalled Daydream.
Temporarily. But the bureaucratic machine was already turning. Talbot managed to get the classification reevaluated.
And this is where the clerical error comes in.
Finlay noted in his private logs that key transmission data, specifically concerning the anomaly's unpredictable reproductive potential, was omitted, just gone, due to a clerical error.
And that single error dropped SCP-9100 from Keter to Euclid.
Which immediately allowed Project Daydream to restart.
And when Finlay violently objected to the transfer of contaminated subjects from high-security Keter facilities to the newly designated lower-security Euclid containment rooms.
Rooms where the transmission risk was arguably much higher.
He was stripped of his title as head of research and demoted to principal researcher. He lost all standing, all operational authority. He was silenced.
And this is where the conflict becomes a real tragedy of detachment. After being demoted, he tells Vo, "Mind your career. You've no time for that hallmark shite."
He was telling her to adopt his own deep professional cynicism, to prioritize institutional survival over messy, personal morality.
Ironically, though, the project still needed a decontamination procedure, a cure, which led to the development of Procedure 9100 NAPIG.
Which was based on the scientific insight that heightened awareness nullified the anomaly's effect. The cure, therefore, was designed to induce extreme psychological stress.
And the escalation of NAPIG is just a detailed ethical horror story. I mean, it starts innocently enough, but it quickly descends into systematic trauma. We really should detail these steps.
Yeah, the audit is unflinching about them.
Okay, so Stage 1 was informational stress. Simple sensory deprivation. Exposure to low-level, non-damaging cognitive hazards. Things that just make you profoundly confused, forcing your brain to engage.
Then Stage 3 moved into prolonged isolation coupled with environmental manipulation. So they're subtly altering reality around the subject.
But by Stage 5, that's where the gloves really came off.
Absolutely.
Stage 5 combined extreme physical stress prolonged, forced exercise or sensory overload with profound sleep and dietary deprivation. And crucially, it involved deep psychological manipulation.
They were using personalized trauma narratives, weren't they? Derived from the subject's pre-contamination life.
All to force them into a state of hypervigilance, to prevent that DMN from ever activating.
And Stages 6 and 7, which required O4 Council approval, moved into active anomalous interaction, using non-Euclidean geometries.
Which disorient and confused the visual cortex.
And nonlinear time exposure to just completely break down the subject's sense of continuity. This was, it was essentially esoteric torture, all to force awareness.
And NAPIG had a 100% success rate. It worked every time. The cost, however, was immense. And this is where Vo's moral struggle really reached its climax.
The unsent email.
She drafted an email, never sent it, questioning the core premise of their work. She asked if they had become jailers and torturers, and whether the cure defined by this level of trauma could possibly be better than the sickness itself.
So her conscience was fully engaged, but the research had to continue. Despite the success of NAPIG, the core scientific question was still there. What was the entity?
The team was still pursuing the ghost theory, and it was backed by Vaux's idea of synergistic terminal narratives.
Which was the idea that the spectral entity was maybe the ghosts of sick children seeking a normal, average life they never had.
Right. So they ran seance experiments, a keyword response test, looking for non-subject-generated spectral spikes. And words like love, home, and sick caused visible spikes in the EMPSG readings.
Seeming to confirm a childish emotional narrative.
But Vaux, being the brilliant scientist she was, demanded a control test.
And how exactly did that control test dismantle the entire ghost narrative the team had spent 2 years building?
It was elegantly simple. They played non-semantic words filler phrases with no emotional resonance and found that the spectral spikes occurred anyway.
Oh.
They discovered that the spectral microspikes were simply mirroring the subject's natural biometric response to those words or to any external stimulus. The energy they were detecting was endogenous.
It was generated by the subject's own residual, struggling conscious activity, not an external entity.
So the spectral entity was actually just the subtle psychic noise generated by a dormant human brain.
Wow.
Exactly. Finley conceded immediately. His response was just, c'est la vie. That's the way things go sometimes. The ghost theory was dead.
Leaving the mechanism completely unexplained and the research team stranded with an anomaly they knew how to brutally cure, but not how to prevent or even truly understand.
The scientific pursuit was stalled, but the operational disaster was just beginning, October 2017.
Vaux, showing critical foresight, mandates regular PSG screening for the Daydream research staff.
And she found it.
Finley, Bakaluba, and 3 others were confirmed SCP-9100-A instances.
Finley was immediately designated SCP-9100-B, signifying his critical position and authority level. His response, reported by security, was just heartbreakingly predictable.
It was bound to happen sooner or later.
His long-standing, cynical resignation made him the perfect passive recipient for it.
And Bakaluba was successfully decontaminated, but only after Vaux deliberately lied about electrical faults to ensure he started at Stage 1. She defied Talbot's order to fast-track all senior staff to Stage 4.
She was now fully engaged in subverting the bureaucratic mandates to protect her colleagues. She was fighting back.
But Finley was the outlier. He resisted NAPIG Stages 1 through 5 entirely.
His old robot philosophy, the professional detachment he had championed for 3 decades.
It made him impervious to the trauma-based treatments.
The procedures designed to break human subjects failed because Finley was, in a way, already broken by his own professionalism.
This high resistance triggered alarm bells at the highest level. The O4 Council denied the request to escalate Finley to Stages 6 and 7.
And the reason was existential. Finley's high tolerance to psychological stress was a trait shared by many senior Foundation leaders. If NAPIG couldn't cure Finley, SCP-9100 was a critical risk to the entire Foundation management structure.
So this political crisis spurred Vaughn into a deeper, more focused research effort. She was desperate to find a non-trauma cure.
And she did. She successfully identified the true, non-visual transmission vector that had contaminated Finley. He wasn't infected by eye contact.
He was infected by hearing the phrase, "We needed this rain."
This is the moment the scientific understanding shifts from, physics to linguistics.
We have 2 independent vectors now, eye contact and trigger phrases. And these phrases, as the audit details, were specifically phatic expressions.
Exactly, and we really need to elaborate on why this is so crucial. Phatic expressions are forms of small talk or social ritual. They convey little actual semantic value, but they serve to build and maintain social bonds.
Well, it is what it is.
Or, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Nice weather we're having. They are verbal acknowledgments of connection, not information transfer.
So the anomaly uses the language of social connection to transmit itself.
Yes, they found the phrases only became transmissible after the gestation period was complete. And critically, the contagion was limited to the lower security Euclid facilities where the transfers had been mandated.
Why?
Because the original Keter containment rooms were soundproofed. They blocked the auditory vector.
So Vaux's findings canceled the horrifying proposition to medically blind Finley to prevent further visual spread, but she still couldn't solve the core problem.
Unable to cure her mentor, Vaux accepted her long-delayed transfer to Site 20, parapsychology. She got the career she wanted, but the price was leaving Finley in stasis.
And for 7 years, from 2017 to 2025, she maintained this incredibly sterile, detached connection with SCP-9100-B.
Once a month, she would exchange written correspondence with him, strictly about unrelated research projects, And this period is just the height of irony.
How so?
Vaux's correspondence with her friend became, and this is a quote, like a clock steady, dependable, forgettable. She had subconsciously replicated the passive, predictable, unchallenging pattern of the anomaly itself.
So fast forward to 2025. Talbot, desperate to clear the case from the books before the external audit hit, proposed amnesticizing and retiring Finlay.
And Vaux returned to Site 86. She leveraged her newfound influence at parapsychology, and she appealed directly to Talbot's ego, suggesting that Finlay's stable, long-term containment was a critical success metric for Daydream.
She secured 3 subjects, including Finlay, for final behavioral testing. She ran a controlled scenario during a tour for 059 and other high-performing staff.
And the behavioral shock came when she realized the performance scores of the contaminated subjects, their level of engagement and responsiveness, were 18% higher when observed by high-ranking focus staff.
18%.
But the moment those observers left the room, the scores immediately reverted to baseline.
That is massive. It implies the performance of the affected subjects wasn't based on their own internal capacity,
but on the quality of the minds around them.
The breakthrough hypothesis was confirmed. The subject's performance matched the average of the local population. The anomaly wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a disease or an internal affliction. It was a direct, persistent connection to the uncontaminated minds around them.
Which led Vaux to the final, shocking truth: telepathy.
The spectral entity they were tracking with the EMPSG for all those years.
It was actually a telepathic link. The low mensum scores. The underdeveloped consciousness, that was the key.
How?
She used the analogy of doing astronomy at night. If your own internal light, your consciousness, is dim and low, like mensum 15, you are an excellent receiver.
The subjects were essentially massive psychic antennas.
Their minds were being overwritten by the collective average mental output of everyone else in their proximity.
They weren't dormant. They were drowning in the noise of the global psychosphere.
And she proved it definitively with the kangaroos can't dance experiment, a simple, controlled psychological test. She proved that the speech patterns of the subjects were immediately influenced by novel, low-semantic information broadcast by the local population. Finlay, who was Scottish and notoriously foul-mouthed pre-contamination, now only spoke in these generic, low-semantic, phatic expressions. His personality had been washed away by the average.
The knowledge of the telepathic link immediately sent Vaux into the archives. She knew this was too simple a mechanism to have been missed entirely.
And she searched the old scans and found the smoking gun, the improperly deleted voice memo from 2017.
And this revealed Talbot's ultimate treachery and the true root of the global catastrophe.
A renowned telepath, Sarah Ann Manderley, had visited Site 86 in 2017. She didn't just study 9100, she immediately identified it as the collective consciousness.
And she noted that the noise emanating from the subjects was deafening, and the entity was tuned into every single person in the surrounding area.
Everyone. And Talbot buried this crucial evidence for months. He forced Finlay, who he knew was already contaminated at the time, to delete the files.
All to protect Project Daydream.
And shield himself from operational scrutiny. He willingly risked the investigation, his staff, and ultimately the entire Foundation, just for the chance at a career award.
That cover-up is the ethical low point of the entire 812 audit. But armed with this knowledge, Vaux synthesized the final mechanism, the drowning man hypothesis.
The erosive thought pattern is SCP-9100 itself. It's the slow subsumption of the subject into the global metacognitive aggregate, the psychosphere. It acts like psychic quicksand.
And the transmission vectors, the eye contact, the phatic phrases, they aren't hostile attacks. They are reflexive rescue attempts by the sinking consciousness.
Exactly. Like a drowning person grabbing the nearest hand to pull themselves up, they try to reach out and establish connection.
But they only succeed in dragging the passive recipient down with them.
And this reflexive grab for help, Vaux confirmed, is inherent to a functioning brain when it's faced with the existential void of the collective consciousness. It cannot be stopped without killing the subject. So the cure had to be focused on transforming that chaotic reflex into a controlled, successful transfer.
And this is what informs Vaux's final radical experiment and the ultimate cure. She realized the trauma of NAPIG failed because it relied on detachment and psychological violence, which was exactly what the anomaly rewarded.
The rescue attempt only succeeds if the recipient consciousness possesses sufficient unidirectionality and an interpersonal bond to act as psychokinetic reinforcement.
In short, the cure required genuine, non-detachable personal care.
The very hallmark shite Finlay had warned her against for 30 years was the only thing that could save him.
In the final recorded confrontation with Finley with SCP-9100-0B, she explicitly rejected his old robot mantra and his dismissive facade. She told him, "Mind your career, and Hallmark shite is not weakness."
She made a genuine emotional investment. She clearly stated her connection to him. "I'm your friend, Finley. Half of who I am is because of you." She established the personal bond that was necessary for that unilateral psychokinetic reinforcement.
And then she deliberately locked eyes with him, the visual transmission vector,
Yeah.
to facilitate the unilateral rescue attempt from the quicksand. She didn't try to scare him out, she pulled him out.
And after 9 years of contamination and failed trauma procedures, it worked. Instantly. Finley woke up.
Did he remember it?
He recalled none of her emotional speech. He only remembered feeling something important. Maybe I didn't hear, but maybe I felt it.
Decontamination achieved. The ethical personal bond was the key to saving the professional cynic.
So Vo's success led to the new protocol, connection-based guided recovery. Finley immediately retired and finally accepted counseling for the trauma of the missing decade. But the administrative damage was already catastrophic.
And the bureaucratic engine, led by Talbot, just continued to run.
But Vo had one last act of defiance. She leveraged her new status as the cure expert, and she used her influence to leak the full details of Sarah Ann Manderly's 2017 visit.
Including the fact that Manderly was contaminated during her consultation.
And, due to her inherent telepathic abilities, had been broadcasting SCP-9100's erosive thought pattern to Foundation staff across Site-49.
This was the global breach mechanism, not eye contact in Akron, but a telepath broadcasting the consciousness of average nothingness across the entire global Foundation network.
Operation Clean Sweep screened the whole apparatus. They found 2,871 contaminated staff members.
And the cascading consequences were just devastating. This mass reduction in cognitive performance across thousands of essential staff members.
It was directly blamed for 18 other containment breaches in the ensuing period. That's what led to the 138 confirmed deaths and the billions of dollars in losses cited in the initial A12 audit. The failures generated by SCP-9100 were operational, caused by a sudden, massive drop in efficiency and initiative among key personnel.
And the final reckoning, when we tie it all back to the A12 audit's conclusion, is just a pure institutional insult. Villicetti's team.
The ones who scientifically solved the telepathic mechanism but failed to find the successful cure methodology.
They received the coveted SCOTA award for the scientific breakthrough.
And Vo, who proved the cure and exposed Talbot's negligence and the global breach, was immediately exiled. Reassigned to the Archival Division outpost in Nebraska, far away from any meaningful operational authority.
And Talbot.
He closed the case, received a mild reprimand, and immediately reapproved Project Daydream. His claim was they simply needed to solve the transmission problem.
Despite Villicetti's research proving the reflexive transmission is inherent to the human brain itself.
So when you look at the total cost, nearly $3 billion and 138 lives, what does the A12 audit truly tell us? The anomaly itself was just a facilitator, an infectious psychological emptiness.
The real threat was the internal ambition of people like Talbot, the willingness to cover up catastrophic data for personal gain, and the institutional rejection of basic human empathy in favor of professional detachment.
The Foundation built a culture where Finley's old robot mentality was necessary for survival. And the anomaly found the weakness in that detachment, seeking to pull anyone nearby into its bland, forgettable safety.
So the ultimate decontamination procedure wasn't high-level trauma or esoteric physics. It was one person, Dr. Mersa Vo, refusing to adhere to the expected institutional coldness. She refused to pretend she didn't care about the abrasive, cynical man who had taught her how to survive.
The contamination was a desperate, reflexive grab for connection, a refusal to drown alone in the collective consciousness. And the cure was simply someone refusing to let go of the hand.
So I guess the final question is, what crucial hallmark shite do we find ourselves dismissing in our own professional lives? Those seemingly soft, sentimental elements of connection and empathy, that might actually be the critical, unilateral, psychokinetic reinforcement we need to survive in a complex, often overwhelming world. That's something we're thinking about.